We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. So, Theresa May has admitted the election didn't quite go to plan. Well, all she needed to do was to take some tips from our very own Michelle Dewberry, who's back after her triumph in Hull, West and Hessel. 1, make sure you're up to date with the latest technology.
Right, Team Dubes, come and join us, everyone. Get involved. Not in this car. Love it. It's great in here. I don't have to stop the filming.
And 2, don't be afraid to take desperate measures.
Votes for Michelle! Votes for Michelle!
Welcome back, Michelle! We love you, even though you came fourth.
Close to there.
Okay.
Close to there.
You'll have your moment. You'll have your moment. On the show today, James is angry about divided Britain. Afua will argue that Grenfell is our Katrina. Graham says it's time we stop terrorising ourselves. And Michelle's got a new phrase, emotional correctness. But first, it's me. We live in troubled times. The nation has been rocked by 3 supposed radical Islamist terror attacks that killed dozens and an appalling and completely avoidable tower block fire that's killed scores. Just this week, the previously unthinkable happened when someone allegedly drove a van into a crowd of Muslims after they left early morning prayers. I've not mentioned the febrile political scene, which is as high-octane and turbocharged as a Ferrari Formula One car. Therefore, now is the time for clear heads. And it's certainly not the time for the Marxist-loving Shadow Chancellor to call for 1 million to take to the streets to try and force out a democratically elected government, nor for the Labour leader to talk of seizing properties in some 70s-style socialist land grab. Is it really too much to ask those responsible for running this country and for providing an opposition to actually behave responsibly?
Nick, are you struggling to understand why people are upset at the moment?
You tell me why they are.
I'll tell you why they are and what's different about the Grenfell Tower, which you mentioned, and the awful terrorist attacks we've had recently as well. Terrorist attacks are carried out by criminals for a wide range of reasons, people who are troubled, problematic, radicalised. Grenfell Tower, as you said, completely preventable by the people we elect to protect us. The people who died in that tower block were failed by our elected representatives. And that, I think, is why people are so apoplectic, because they were vulnerable people in bed at 1 a.m. Low-income people, by definition, are the kind of people who live in these tower blocks, these high-rise social housing buildings. And it's because of failures by the people we look to protect us, to make sure that the places we live meet regulation, to make sure that there are procedures to look after us when things go wrong, who failed us. And that is why people are angry. Now, I'm not condoning some of the language you referred to from the Labour Party, but the sentiment, I think, I completely relate to, and I can understand why people are so emotional.
Yeah, OK, I get that. And of course, and if you've had your house burnt down or you've lost loved ones, I totally understand. But that is why we need clear-headed politicians providing a lead, and opposition politicians. And of course the opposition are here to hold to account whatever decisions might have been taken. It's worth remembering, of course, many governments are culpable. It was actually under a previous Labour administration that responsibility was taken away. It was under a coalition government that other areas, and it's under the Conservative government we find ourselves now. What I don't understand is suggesting that we requisition homes that are lying open, that we have 1 million people on the streets in a couple of weeks, that we had a, quote, day of rage this week, that luckily passed without any incident, but was a massive drain on our policing. That is not responsible. And these people are supporting it, Afua.
Who are you, Nick, to say how people should respond to something that affects
politicians.
them as deeply as
No.
Well,
I'm not talking about the
I
residents.
think
Within reason, they can do what they like.
I think, looking at the political response, I agree that some of the language we've heard has not been helpful, but I think the sentiment of it compulsory purchase orders are part of the ordinary business of government. When we have a big infrastructure project, just let me finish. When we have a big infrastructure project, we don't hesitate to purchase, I'm not saying seize, purchase homes. If we need to, we have people who didn't have anywhere to live. Now, what's been done, it seems, is that a deal has been done with a private housing provider to buy
No, that's
homes that were allocated.
James, come in after we watch.
This is, I think, within the spirit of what the Labour Party were trying to express, that something drastic needed to be done.
So all the viewers, and James, come to you after this, so all the viewers know what we're talking about. This is John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, with Sophie Ridge on Sky News at the weekend.
What Jeremy said is if we've got a crisis like that, we need urgent measures. And if there are empty properties nearby, they should be used. And councils have the power to do that already.
Through compulsory purchase orders,
if necessary,
which would take weeks. It wouldn't help, would it? 'Cause it would take too long.
You can use the existing law extremely fast. But it does point to
by law, the owners must be notified, given 21 days to raise objections. Then there's another 14 days after the
any court in emergency measures, as we saw in wartime periods as well. You can requisition properties. You will need powers to do it. We've got those powers.
Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell. James.
That is the biggest load of codswallop I've ever heard in my entire life.
You should listen to Graham.
Yeah, regularly on Saturdays.
Did I hear the phrase, in wartime Britain? Is that what he said?
I don't agree with comparing this to
Afua,
a war. And you know my views on comparing these crises to a war.
Let me explain.
We have a rule of law. Nobody can circumvent that. So part of what we're saying is nonsense.
Do you really want to destroy this country?
No.
But listen to me. You have a situation where I get there's a crisis, I get people are upset, but we have choices. You know, repossessing people's homes is not an intelligent choice. The government have a responsibility. There's lots of properties that they could rent. You go and rent properties, provide a solution, you rent hotels, hostels, whatever you need to do. But taking other people's homes cannot be an intelligent... Can you imagine the reputation of this country? We generate, I'm telling you, tens of billions of pounds per year in foreign income that comes to this country with people investing in property in this country. If the government, over this incident, started taking those people's homes, people would stop investing in this country.
We hear a lot about how great it is for the economy that we have so many foreign investors buying homes here. How much does it cost for the government to have to, and fail to, build homes that are needed for people who don't have homes? We have thousands of empty homes in the capital. Foreign investors are profiting from the appreciation. Ordinary people have nowhere to live. There is a cost to that. You know, we're not looking at this in the round. And just before, I know Graham and Michelle want to come in, but I just want to show you the sentiment of some of the people who are close to this and how they feel about that kind of language and the idea that the Labour Party...
Just so I'm clear.
No, I've made it very clear that I don't support the language of seizing homes. We have a rule of law in this country. You can't just march and seize people's homes. You know, nobody is seriously suggesting that. And actually, the Labour Party clarified that that's not what they mean. I just want you to hear that's not what they meant. I just want you to hear how people are actually affected by this, because it's easy for us to sit here and talk about investors and not damaging the reputation.
We mustn't get confused.
Can we just hear what he says, and then you come in, Graham?
People need a revolution in this country, nothing short of that. And if this was any other country, there'd have been a revolution. We've seen how you, the mainstream media, have responded and reacted. For 2 years, you've hounded, demonised Jeremy Corbyn. And you said he was unelectable. He can't be... There's no possibility of this man being elected. And you created that narrative that people actually believed your for a while.
Graham.
I mean, the thing is... I agree with James, and I agree with what you're saying. I know that you're saying, you can't be saying it's like the Second World War when this tragedy happened. These people have been failed, absolutely, we all agree with that. And for me, the key things is to get to the bottom of who failed them, who's responsible, and hold them to account. And the deeper, long-term problem that has been going on since, I don't know, the late 70s, is the fact that we've constantly taken away the opportunity for people to live in social housing. There's no supply, there's no stock, and longer term, that is a huge issue for us. And that, for me, is the big problem here, is that if we've neglected a huge part of our community who need to live somewhere with decency, with respect, in all variety of communities. I think that's one of the most amazing things when I first came to London in the late 80s, was how you had so many different types of people living street by street, door to door. And we should be celebrating that, but you can't neglect those people, absolutely. But what upsets me is that we politicise a tragedy in this way.
Yes.
Hold people accountable, by all means, but let's not politicise it. Let's not leverage their pain and suffering in order to score points against each other. And that's what I see is happening at the moment.
Let's also celebrate the return of Michel Djibril after being out on campaigning. Good luck with all of that. What do you say to this one?
Well, I think it goes without saying almost that what's happened at Grenfell is terrible, and I think those people have been badly let down by its successive governments, to your point, its regulations, its councils. It's not a single person or a single entity. But what I'm concerned about is that this tragedy, and it is a tragedy, has been leapt on by all kinds of hard-left activists, by people trying to whip up some kind of fury to try and create further division in a country that, quite frankly, doesn't need further division. I think these conversations about requisitioning people's homes, I'd never even heard the word requisitioning before all of this stuff that came about.
It happens all the time when we have infrastructure projects, like Crossrail, for example. They've been compulsory ordering homes all over London for that.
But what's happening now? Let me just finish my point there. What's happening now is people are saying this, let's take all these empty properties from these rich people. And they're saying it as almost like this political top trumps to make a point. There's empty local authority properties. There's empty buildings. Having this narrative, this narrative about look at all these rich people with their empty homes. If you own a home, it's yours. You can live in it full-time, part-time, or however much of the time. It's your home.
Afua, let's come back to how politicians are behaving. Now, you probably didn't hear this because you were here and I'd come here very late because of the radio and I was on a motorbike, but we had an emergency statement in the Commons from Theresa May, and then there was a response by Jeremy Corbyn, and he actually linked Hillsborough, the Rotherham child abuse scandal, and Grenfell as how working-class people have suffered in all of them. I'm sorry, that is irresponsible language at this time. We should not be trying to foment some kind of working-class, class war revolution. It is tragic what happened. But if you honestly think that councillors, council executives, politicians thought, let's just herd them into a housing block in West London, we don't care, that is wholly and utterly unfair. And language like that does not help at this time.
It's easy to say that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't see this as some conspiracy to screw or burn to death people who are low income. But I think it's really easy to sit here and criticise, as you did, Michelle, far-left activists. The fact is, the residents of Grenfell Tower chose a different kind of cladding that was not combustible. They were ignored. They have been writing blogs, trying to get attention for their concerns. Groups like that are always dismissed as kind of, leftist activists. I've covered them so many times. They're not listened to, and now they are actually being heard because people have died.
And in the same statement 3 hours ago, Jeremy Corbyn rightly brought that to attention. That's what Mr Corbyn should be talking about. Why were all these warnings ignored? Not trying to stir up working-class hostility.
Let me just close on that. I agree with everything we're saying. These people have been badly let down. But the solution, if I wanted to rent an apartment today, it wouldn't take me very long to find a flat to rent. There are many, many properties out there the government could rent for these people. When you talk about there's no stock available, there's a lot. If you go all over London, all I see right now is developments going on everywhere. If the government took responsibility and we have a crisis, it shouldn't be developers buying that land to build those apartments. It should be the government.
I agree. We'll have more opportunities to talk about that because my topic is also linked to the Grenfell Tower. And I am asking how, in the 21st century, in one of the richest economies in the world, a building housing hundreds of people turns into a deadly inferno. We cannot ask that question enough following the fire at Grenfell Tower. Devastating evidence that political leaders could have prevented this catastrophe will and must continue to plague them. This fire is Britain's Hurricane Katrina, revealing truths about the extent of injustice and insecurity for low-income people in our society that have been far too easy to ignore. Like George W. Bush in New Orleans, our Prime Minister's failure to respond immediately with warmth, compassion and certainty reveals a callousness that is part of the bigger picture of placing the interests of the rich above the poor. Like Katrina, the fire itself is the beginning, not the end, of the disaster. Our governments have been far too willing to ignore this unacceptable reality for far too long. We should be outraged not just at the scale of the problem, but that it takes a tragedy like this to wake us up.
I mean, just to pick you up on a couple of things. I mean, it's an extension of what we're saying. Hurricane Katrina cost £100 billion
Just to clarify, I'm not comparing in the scale of the disaster, because obviously so many more people were killed.
2,000 people.
The comparison that I'm making is about the political response and how damaging it is when something tragic happens and a government doesn't act swiftly and appropriately.
It shows, I think, what Grenfell Tower exposes is, as we've said already, a failure of so many different parts of government, whether it's local government, whether it's national government, and cutting corners, quite frankly.
For the first few days, having lost everything, having heard people screaming as they were trapped in that building, they were being given £10 a day, and the Prime Minister went and didn't meet the victims.
I think you're right.
Personally.
I think it is appalling. I think, but before we throw Theresa May under the bus, I think the first 4 days was a disaster, and I think everybody accepts that. I heard her this morning in a speech, and actually I think that they are now responding. I think they are taking action. I think people will be held accountable, and I think over the next 3 or 4 weeks we will start to see the action that the government take, which I'm hoping will be positive. At the end of the day, we do have rule of law in this country. Somebody is responsible for what happened. There will be a committee set up, and those people will get deserved compensation for what has happened. We house them, provide them everything. So, actually, I'm probably a bit more optimistic than you are that listening to her speech this morning, I think she will take action, and I'd just like to see that she will address what you're saying.
I mean, just Nick, before I know what you're going to say, and you're going to probably.
No, respectfully, I have a slight bloody clue what I'm going to say.
I can make an educated guess, but just before you do, I'm not trying.
Well, what am I going to say?
I'm not trying to politicise this.
Go on.
I am trying to link it to what I think.
Do it anyway.
No, I'm trying to link it to what I think are much deeper problems, and actually, I think the Labour Party, when in government, and the coalition have all had a role to play in this. But you know, we've had this horrendous fire. There's so many questions now being asked about cladding and sprinkler systems. Housing in this country is in chaos. You know, one in 3 people live in houses below the standard for human habitation. So when I say a callousness, I'm not talking about what Theresa May did or didn't do. I'm talking about the fact that we live in a society where we think it's OK for low-income people, 1/3 of them, to live in housing that's not fit for human habitation, and 1 in 6 that actually presents a risk to health.
You've actually said that this was Britain's Hurricane Katrina,
and that's
so
why.
you've clearly chosen to ignore that one was an act of God and another was man-made, but we'll put that to one side because you might not be able to grasp that. You also talked, I'm quoting you directly, about a callousness placing interests of the rich over the poor from Mrs May. Should we just walk through what that woman has done? I agree, her first visit to the scene was poorly handled. Meeting solely with the fire services was wrong. She subsequently returned, quite rightly, and met with some of the victims. She then went to the hospital and met with some of the survivors. Over the weekend, she had more of the victims and some of the victims' families, I'm sorry.
When I say callousness, I'm not talking about the way Theresa May behaved. I'm talking about the general approach of government to looking after the interests.
She then prayed. This is a vicar's daughter. She then prayed with the Archbishop of Canterbury for the victims, for the survivors and their families. She has now ordered an extensive public inquiry. I would imagine she's worked damn hard to ensure that the Chief Executive has decided to do other things with his professional life, and she's made it quite plain that she expects an interim report of the full public inquiry pretty quick. She's made a lot of money available. Every family, quite rightly, is getting £5,000. Individuals over the age of 16 are getting £300. That will not go on their tax. They don't want any of the money back. It's not going to affect their benefits or anything else. To suggest that there's callousness placing the interests of the rich over the poor, when she's not had a great innings at the start, but by God, she's played well since.
I just explained that by saying that, I'm not just narrowly talking about the way Theresa May behaved. I think she made mistakes. I'm not necessarily saying she is a callous person.
Her under the bus.
No, I'm not. I'm not really interested in that. This is so much bigger than one politician or one Prime Minister or one party. This is the fact that depending on how much money you have and the circumstances of your life, you can live in a place that is potentially fatal. You think she doesn't,
as a vicar's daughter, you don't think she doesn't personally grieve and mourn for those people?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Callousness placing...
That is not what I'm saying. Are you listening to a word that I'm saying, Nick?
I doubt that over any of the people actually involved, she is grieving as much as anybody.
I am saying...
Really?
And not just her, and not just the Conservative Party, but I'm saying successive governments...
You said she did.
I'm saying there is a callousness in government, not just this government.
You said she showed a callousness.
I didn't say she showed a callousness. I said this shows a callousness, and I made it clear to you that I'm talking about the actions of successive governments in providing adequate, safe housing for low-income people in this country. There's a pattern that has been going on for decades.
I think the use of the word callousness is, in whatever context, is wrong. I think there's very few people in this world that would be able to look at someone and go, do you know what, I don't care if you live or die just because you don't earn as much money as me or them or him. I don't buy that argument. I don't agree with what you're suggesting. What I'm saying is that actually what's gone on here is there's this constant lack of ability from any government, I don't care which one it is, to look at what's happening and learn lessons, whether it's, I know, for example, in Hull, where I'm from, I might not have mentioned that, but in Hull we had really severe flooding. We didn't really learn lessons from the flooding, so I would argue that if we ever had a massive flood again, we would struggle with many of the same issues. You know, this tower block fire, tragic as it is, it's not the first tower block fire. We haven't learnt lessons from before. And there is this real strong feeling to firstly learn lessons and secondly for there to be a system in place which allows people to properly report their concerns. Because as you rightly said before, the residents in this block, they were constantly saying, you know, we have this worry, we have this concern. That concern was falling on deaf ears. So what we've got to do in all of this is step back, and it has to be cross-government, because what I'm really struggling with is this politicising of issues, because actually this affects all of us. It doesn't matter what party you support. Cross-government, we need to come together with unity and say, how do we learn lessons? Cross-party. Yeah, how do we learn lessons? How do we look forward beyond a 5-year parliamentary term, but long-term to fix these problems properly? And when people constantly say, Theresa May's fault, Jeremy Corbyn's fault, his fault, her fault, you're not going to get anywhere.
But it's also, I think, you know, where I said the government behaved appallingly was the initial stages, and I think that goes to show how important it is that you have contingency for these sorts of tragic events. And where you are right in terms of linking it to Katrina is, you know, Bush, he made a catastrophic error in terms of how he initially reacted to Hurricane Katrina by not engaging with the very people that had suffered, and that for me was a failure of government, because they should have been the first people there to show their support, and that would have, I think that could have tempered slightly the outpouring of anger, not grief, of course, but anger that was the reaction. She left the door wide open for that.
I mean, you try telling the people who live in that block that the government response wasn't callous, and you also, when I say that, I just want to clarify, because I think it's been really misunderstood. You know, I'm not interested in blaming Theresa May. I'm sure that she feels, I think everybody, like you said, who's seen this has been horrified and heartbroken by it. When I say callousness, I mean a system that will have recommendations from a previous committee that this kind of cladding should not be used, that sprinklers should be installed, that residents fear it will take a catastrophic loss of life to be listened to, and they are ignored. To me, that is a callous system. How else can you describe a system that will ignore those kind of concerns until people die?
Well, this will obviously we'll find out more and more as the public inquiry gathers pace. Our media should abandon the words terror, terrorism and terrorist altogether. Leave those terms to the police and the courts. Blowing up people at a concert, mowing down others, leaving a mosque, and stabbing a policeman outside the Houses of Parliament are criminal acts. We ought to treat them as such. If the media called these deeds what they are, crimes, the result would be more analysis and less sensationalism. If we stopped saying terror, we would end the problem of how to determine which outrages constitute terrorism and which ones don't. The perpetrators of these wicked crimes crave notoriety. When we call them terrorists, we provide them with what they seek, and at the same time terrorise ourselves. The word itself casts a shadow of fear. Let's not play into their narrative and give them the platform they so desperately want.
I think this is slightly tough for me because in many ways I agree with you because when you see something that's bad that's happened, it's scary, and when you see the subsequent media coverage, it's relentless. It's rolling news. And it is subconsciously putting you, or making me, I'm not going to lie, it makes me scared when I see stuff like that. And it makes many people that I know scared, for example, to come to London and all the rest of it. So I think to agree with you on the point of sensationalising it, I agree that we need to try not to do that. I think obviously we need to report these things in an accurate manner. And I think that in a French media outlet, they had some of the right ideas. So, for example, they put a thing in place that when somebody had blown themselves up, they refused point blank to give this person any form of recognition. So they didn't
Le Monde, the newspaper.
They didn't put pictures of them. Yeah, they didn't put the names, they didn't put the pictures, because they didn't want to create this kind of what's the word? Like somebody,
glorified,
they didn't want to do that.
notoriety.
Yeah, notoriety, and they didn't want to create this cult, if you like, where people go, oh, I want to be like him, I want to do that, I want to do what they've done, and somehow resonate with that cause. So I agree with you, but I think you've got to get the balance right, haven't you? Because you can't just ignore it and just say, oh, it was just one lone person that did this and ignore it.
Nick, as a journalist, you know...
Well, as a journalist, I can tell you're talking a load of bull. So you're running Sky News, and word comes in that someone's gone into the arena at Manchester and blown themselves up and taken it. How are you going to describe it?
Well, it's whether you describe it as a hate crime, whether you
hate crime,
whether you describe it as a criminal act.
Well, I don't know. You're running you're going the rules. Don't ask me.
Yeah.
I'm asking what you describe.
Mass murder, criminal network. There are lots of words you can.
Murder. Right.
Yeah, there's lots of words you can.
So then,
the definition of terrorism is backed up by a political aim. Okay.
Yeah. Now, so then it's day two. So then it's day two, and the role of Sky News and other news agents is to try and explain why somebody feels it's a good idea.
Yeah.
How are you going to get into that?
But I think you can get because you can get into their ideology if there is one. Now, for all these recent attacks, you name me a common ideology from all of the people that have committed these attacks. Well, obviously we can't specifically talk about.
But the ones we can talk about, Westminster.
Well, let's use Joe Cox's murder as well as an example of right-wing extremism.
Right.
Okay. And the only common thread is they're all entitled sort of terrorist.
No, I can't. I'm sorry, I'm not going to let that, because in instances that we can talk about, in some cases, the London Bridge, the perpetrators there are running around shouting Allah Akbar as they're actually stabbing people.
But is that
Thomas Mayer, the murderer.
Political ideology?
Well, they see it as. I mean, OK, right. You're still the boss of Sky News. Have a look at this. Have a look at this. This was a still from an event that took place in a Brussels station earlier this week, and then I'll come back to you and you can write the script. Right. This is what we saw, right? So now you're reading the news or you're writing the news on Sky. How are you going to describe that? What are you going to say?
Well, you could describe it in any manner of ways without necessarily saying that's a terrorist act.
Do you know what that was at Brussels?
Yeah. It was a failed attempt to detonate a bomb, wasn't it? By a criminal. By a
criminal? Well, if I don't pay my TV licence, I'm a criminal. If I steal a packet of sweeties from the corner shop, that's a bit more than that, isn't it?
If you murder your wife, you're a criminal. You know, why is there this existential difference with terrorist attacks?
Because facts help people come to... People are nervous.
This is something that's been created.
Oh my God, what was that I just looked at? Was that Disney then?
Narrative that's been created. Somebody like that in Brussels, say you fear someone's going to blow themselves up with a bomb.
Why deny people facts? Why deny people facts?
That is not a fact. The fact is that is someone with a bomb trying to blow themselves up and hurt people.
And it's a believed terror attack.
The word terrorist is a narrative that's been created. It's not a fact. The facts are what I just said.
It's a suspected terror attack.
That's because that's what it's been labelled.
You wouldn't call it a suspected terror attack?
I completely agree with Graham. And, you know, the reason Le Monde decided to stop printing the names and pictures of suspects is because they recognise that the media has a special responsibility in these cases because we create and feed the narrative.
But can I just throw in, I think the event at the mosque, I think, goes to the heart of what you're saying. I actually agree with you. I think that we sensationalise it, and also because now what's happened is the word terror, I think statistically, something like 80% of the time the word terror is used, the word Islamophobia is used. So all of a sudden, we're now doing exactly what you're saying. We're now it's just not the definition of terror, but we're now linking an entire community.
But you can see that, particularly in this time of social media, when people... This brings you... People are tweeting about what might have happened, how many people might have been killed. The idea that 150 people perished in Grenfell Tower. It's important that you have as many facts. And I'm not saying in Brussels it was a terror attack. You must be able to say it's a suspected terror attack, Graham. You have to.
But the fact is...
Otherwise, we're going backwards.
But the point for me is that I think we're giving groups like ISIS, or whatever they call themselves, and Al-Qaeda, we're giving them sustenance. We're feeding their campaign in order... Because we're joining all these dots together... And effectively, we're creating it like
your kids are younger, and they say, I know they're older now, but Daddy, why are these men blowing themselves up in Brussels railway station?
Yeah, but I don't want to categorise all of these things as horrific as they are. Of course.
But what would you say?
I would say that it's a mindless murderer.
I can actually tell you what I did.
Well, he's murdered people, isn't he?
My daughter's school outing was cancelled because of the Manchester bombing. So she was supposed to be going to the Tower of London. She'd been looking forward to it all year. It happened to be the one outing I was free to go on, I know. And it got cancelled because the parents freaked out, completely understandably. And sorry, it wasn't after Manchester, it was after the London Bridge attack, so it was close to home. And we all then faced the dilemma of what to tell our 5- and 6-year-old children.
So what did you tell your daughter?
I said that there are really bad people doing scary things and hurting other people. First of all, because the word terrorist wouldn't mean anything to her. But secondly, I want you to explain to us, try and get your head around this, Nick. Just try. Just stretch the brain cells. Right? What does it add to the facts?
Knowledge.
Right? The fact that somebody is trying to commit an act of murder and violence, that they are motivated by certain ideology. What does the actual specific word, terrorist, add to our understanding that Graham wasn't conveying with the other explanations?
I'll keep it really brief. A possible sense of understanding or motive as to why he or they have done what they've done.
And
that's all.
Just quickly, what Lamont said is Lamont said, to Michelle's point right at the beginning, that their headlines and the reason for them dropping names of people and not showing pictures of them is because they wanted to resist the strategy of hate.
Right.
And that's the thing for me with labelling everything that is happening.
Well, they're wrong on that as well, by the way. No, they are, because if I see a picture and I've seen that bloke trying to hire trucks or something like that, I need to tell the authorities. We can't start not showing these people.
But we could clearly debate this forever and a day, but, you know, it's my turn next, and I want to explain why I'm angry about divided Britain. It angers me that the actions of a tiny minority affecting entire communities in our country. Just after midnight on Monday, a van was driven into worshippers outside a mosque in North London. The suspect, Darren Osborne, a middle-aged white man, but of course that doesn't mean all middle-aged white men are racist. The London Bridge attackers apparently shouted, "This is for Allah," but of course it doesn't mean all Muslims are terrorists. The local imam who intervened after the Finsbury Park attack has been called a hero this week, and rightly so, by protecting the suspect and apparently using his own body to shield him. He put his humanity and the rule of law first. Immigration makes communities stronger, not weaker. There are many different races and colours in this country, but that's precisely what makes us Great Britain. Of course we need to hold these people accountable for their criminal acts, but let's not forget the responsible, hard-working Muslims who make a positive contribution to our society and economy every single day.
I think something new has entered the tone in covering these sort of crimes, James, which perhaps wasn't there some years ago, which is an attempt to try and show, and I know that I make a point of it when I deal with it on the radio, and I'm sure when Afra writes about it, is that we make the point that these people aren't Muslims. The people who are running around London Bridge, the person in Manchester, the person who drove over Westminster Bridge, they're just criminals, they're just thugs, they're misguided. They totally misrepresent the faith of Islam. There are millions of people around the world, probably billions of people around, and hundreds of thousands in this country who would no sooner consider doing that than they think they'd be able to fly to the moon. So whereas I think, yes, we probably were a slightly divided Britain. I think much as we hear of what the Imam is meant to have done at the attack of the weekend, in a way I liken that to the Millwall fan who was caught up in the London Bridge attack. I don't know if you heard about that, who actually put himself in harm's way. He sustained a number of cuts so people could escape from the bar he was drinking in. And when these guys are shouting Allah Akbar, he shouts, F off, I'm Millwall. And just literally, and just decides. So I don't think we're as divided as we are, and I think in a way the media's come in for a lot of criticism, probably justly. I know that I do, and I would say that most papers, in fact, I'd say all papers, go to great lengths to show that these people are just thugs and criminals, they're not Muslims.
The balance...
So you're just contradicting what you said earlier.
About my debate, I'll let that ride. I'll let the viewers decide. I'll let the viewers decide on that. Yeah.
That's what Graham was trying to tell you when you insisted on terrorism.
No, but you have to say they're terrorists. No. But as regards, regards their faith, they think they're Muslims. We know they're not really Muslims. They're just radicalised.
I have to say that the balance that the media, the broader media, has struck with reporting the heroes in all of these events, I'm constantly optimistic because you see heroes that do something, put their lives at risk to protect other people.
But Graham, can I tell you, you know, in this country right now, there are thousands and thousands of Muslims who are literally afraid to leave their homes right now.
Well, there are.
Because they're frightened, because of the way the media projects, that everybody who's a Muslim is a terrorist.
I agree, and to what you're saying there, there's a lady that was interviewed in London after the Finsbury Park attack who I think puts your fears and what you think puts it very eloquently.
We're scared that not just as a Muslim community, but as a community, we fear for our lives. I fear for my son as a mother to even send him to school. This is what it's come to. I'm a member of the community. I have been born here. This is my country. And every day I feel less and less part of it. And it's not fair. It's not fair. Why?
For me, that sentiment, I think it's important to hear that perspective, whether you agree with it wholly or not. You know, I think it's so important that we hear that and that we use these tragic events to actually illustrate how close we all are in many ways, because there is incredible strength of unity in this country.
I'm not denying that, but I'm saying to you,
but absolutely,
that is the voice of thousands.
Yeah,
that's not a single voice.
And again, it goes back to what we've been discussing all the time. It's the narrative rather than reality, and I think it's really important that that whatever the form of extremism is, if we're going to say it's extremism, then whatever form that is, whether it's based on Islamist jihadis or right-wing extremists, we've got to make sure that we're balanced in the way, and that these people are sort of talked about in the media in the same way, because there's definitely a weight. It's weighted towards the Muslim community. I have lots of people that I know that feel much more intimidated now. The last couple of years, they feel when they go out on the streets, they're being judged, and the surface is so thin, that veneer is so thin between them being accepted and feeling vulnerable, and that's unacceptable.
Restricted to the Muslim community, of course.
It's not.
Because Afwa's daughter's school trip couldn't go ahead, so there'd have been loads of other kids who were frightened about it. And James, do you not think the media has become far more responsible in its reporting?
Surely? No, I don't. No.
Give me examples.
Can I give you an example, Nick?
Please.
Because I do think that the media is now much more sensitised to kind of say, of course, this doesn't represent all Muslims. But one thing I've actually been involved in as a reporter, which I disagreed with at the time, was the idea that when there's a terrorist attack, you go to a Muslim area and start asking people, what do you think? Do you condemn this? And then Muslims are all expected to say, as a Muslim, I condemn this. Why should a Muslim condemn this any more than a white person should condemn the person who killed Joe Cox? You know, they feel this has nothing to do with us. And I think that's something we do still do.
With respect, that wouldn't happen now.
I don't know, Nick. And the other thing I would just say is, you know, I know a lot of journalists now go to lengths to kind of differentiate and explain this as an extremist ideology, but how many people in the country really get that? There are a lot of people that don't know any Muslims personally, that don't really know much about the faith, but when they see these atrocities and they see the words Islamist extremism or Islamist terror, they are not making that distinction. And just quickly, I want to say, in the last week, two of my friends, this hasn't happened to me, and I'm not Muslim, two of my friends have had really horrific things that they both reported to the police happen to them. One was told by a man with a big dog, her and her mother, that they should back to where they belong. And the other intervened when a Sikh man was being accused of being a paedophile by an angry woman on a bus who was just abusing him. And when she intervened, she got abused as well. And, you know, I think these things are happening. You can't detract, like James said, like Graham agreed. You know, this is the experience of people living it. So whatever we sit here and say, we're all responsible journalists and the debate is nuanced, this is happening on the streets. You know, what do you say to that?
Absolutely is.
Well, what I think is it's horrible to watch that clip with that lady there saying she's afraid because of her religion, for her and her son's safety. That makes me sad. I don't think that anybody, based on their religious choice or any other choice, should feel afraid to live in this country. I think that's fundamentally wrong. But I also do think, James, that we need to be realistic, that there is a common thread that's running through a huge number of these attacks. There is. And what I think that needs to happen is there needs to be honesty and open conversation about what that link is. I think for too long, I think that those links and the obvious links were just dismissed, was put, you know, hidden in order to not be unpolitically correct or politically correct or whatever the word is. I think to be politically correct, people were ignoring that. And I think that longer that was ignored, I think that's fuelled hatred and fear amongst people. So I think that what needs to happen is honest conversation to acknowledge that there is a common thread. It's Islamist extremism, as I would label it. Yeah. What does that even mean? How is that different from Islam? And there's so many different words and experiences and feelings. So I think there's education and honest conversation that needs to be had. And only once that happens can we start moving properly forward.
But the outcome of all of these situations, and God forbid there's more coming, but I think it's so important that at some point we pull it back from the extreme, because 99.9% of people want to live in a multicultural society that has taken a long time to create, and you've got to work really hard to pull it back so that people don't judge other people by the way they look or the way they dress.
I don't know if I agree that 99% of people... I think James is right. I think we're really divided. I think a lot of us really value the fact that this is a multicultural society, but I think there's been a huge backlash against that, and a lot of people actually feel very hostile to people who are visible minorities.
I'd be devastated if it was a bigger percentage than 1 or 2% of this country. Maybe I've got my head in the sand.
I love your optimism.
But I just think it's horrific.
I suppose what we're saying is that we've all experienced and come across people who have been victimised in this way because of the situation, just exactly what Afua said. And I get, honestly, so many people who say to me, I was, attacked in the street, or my mother or my brother. And whatever the issue is, the bottom line is that is where we've got to. And all the point I'm making is, we need to accept reality. We are becoming a bit divided. If we don't address the issue, this does not go away.
Agreed.
We have to deal with it.
Agreed. Right, panel, stand by for my debates, because I'm going to say something slightly controversial. We're living in turbulent times. Frequent terror attacks, natural disasters, man-made disasters, and seemingly avoidable disasters. You'd have to be made of stone not to be moved by the things we're experiencing. And of course it goes without saying that these things hurt and affect most of us. And of course our thoughts are with those affected. But overwhelmingly, I'm feeling pressured about what my response must be to each of these events, that somehow, if I'm not rushing to change my profile pictures, issue condolences immediately on social media, or pause for minute silences, that somehow I don't care. A race to be the first to hug victims, in front of cameras, obviously, has become the latest sport to those losing the race deemed robotic. During the election, my team in Hull was branded heartless after handing out leaflets 2 days after a terror attack 200 miles away, and separately, I was subject to scores of hate-filled messages after an email regarding my election campaign was sent, not by me, to people a day after a different terror attack because somehow I was disrespecting the dead. We've seen the rise of political correctness and the damage it's doing, and I beg people not to embark on a new offence campaign, emotional correctness.
Michelle, I understand the point, but I think the essence here is about respect. If there is a tragedy and there is a minute's silence, there's nothing wrong with that. All it's really doing is just coming out and saying that I am concerned and I want to show my respect. I think you're kind of putting it a bit out of context because you're throwing the whole lot into a bowl of soup to say that we've got to be doing it all day long. If I'm at a football game, and somebody's passed away, I absolutely want to show respect. And I think when you don't do that, it's not about politically correct. I just think it's disrespectful.
So I don't share your view. I think that I do in some ways actually, if you want to, if the way that you choose to show respect to a terrible incident is to involve yourself in a silence or a changing profile picture or whatever else it is, I completely respect that view. Where I'm saying is it's getting to the point, and I felt this in the election campaign because the electioneering was paused after both terror attacks, and it was a very fluid situation. So you'd wake up in the morning and you would not be sure what was the respectful thing to do, because of course you're hurt and concerned when there was an attack and you feel for the victims.
Michelle, you put yourself out there in the public domain, you become a public figure, and people expect something in that situation. And unfortunately, it just goes with the territory. And people expect, because if you're out there and you're campaigning and you're on television and you are not seen because you're kind of supposed to set the example.
But for me, the example, so let me just stick with my particular experience of the election campaign. So you show your respects, you know, you pause the campaigning. Now, to me, the time that you actually want to see strong politicians, you want to engage with the politicians, you want to hear, what are you going to do about this? How are you going to help us? How are you going to keep us safe? I would want somebody knocking on my doors. I wouldn't see that as being disrespectful. And actually what it turned into other candidates using it as fuel. Look at her. She doesn't care. Everyone, hello, hello. She doesn't care because 3 days ago, hundreds of miles away, something happened and someone in her team has just posted a leaflet. She doesn't care that people have been attacked. It was the most ridiculous thing.
Is it about how people judge? Do you think it's about how people judge you rather than the lack of respect? Is it that people are judgmental and if you don't behave in a certain way after something's happened, either through social media or in a public place, is that your point? My
point and my concern is that, as I've already expressed multiple times, I'm concerned about political correctness and it's going too far and what that's led to. My concern, and if I look at, for example, Grenfell Tower, what happened there was absolutely awful. But that's now turned into almost like a competition between politicians as to who can be photographed hugging as many people as quickly as possible. Because look at me, I'm going to cuddle him. That means that I care. Look at her. She's over there talking to those people. Well, I'm not being funny, but the reality was, let me just finish my point about that. My reality was, when you looked at how people wanted to receive Theresa May, they were furious. They were absolutely going mental about her and what she'd done. And then I'm going to say to you, go and meet them. You're going to be slightly reluctant to do so. It doesn't mean that you're callous.
Well, that's what I
or
take.
That you don't care.
Well, just give me one of this, and then Afua, that's what the only positive. I agree with James. If you want to take part in a minute's silence, or you want to stay quiet before a rugby or football match, absolutely right. But where I do think you're onto something is that fairly soon, when you ring the emergency service, it'll be fire, police, ambulance, Mrs May or Jeremy Corbyn. Which do you want to come round first? That's how it'll be. And our politicians will be judged on how lachrymose they can be. Which is absolutely absurd. I mean, just how soon they can weep and how much they can emote. That is not leadership. So I take from that, I agree with that. We must not judge politicians by how much they can make us cry or how many children they can hug. But if you want to have a minute's silence with you, I think we should live in a country where we can do that.
Well, I actually find this debate quite ironic because when we were talking about Grenfell Tower, I think that it was the fact that there wasn't enough emotion that was the issue. You know, I think that I'm completely with you, Michelle, that I don't think we should police people's emotional response. However, if you are a political leader, you should have a sense of responsibility for the well-being of the nation, vulnerable people, people in social housing. And I think, you know, maybe the reason that Jeremy Corbyn, for example, was hugging people was that he actually felt compassionate for them. You know,
well, maybe that's just how he shows his
compassion. And maybe
compassion.
there were Conservative politicians hugging people away from the cameras because they also felt compassion, you know. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with leaders being emotional. And the second thing is that, you know, I also think this is...
Is it wrong if they're unemotional?
Yeah, that's what I was about to come back at you.
Is it wrong if they just don't show emotions?
I think that everybody is responsible for their own emotional responses. If Theresa May had stood up and said, I reacted in this way because X, Y, Z, I think I would have respected it. But she got up and said I was wrong.
But we didn't see Winston Churchill wandering around the East End hugging people.
I mean, do we want to go back to leaders like Winston Churchill? That's a whole other conversation I'd love to have with you, especially given his views on empire and race. The other point is, you know, when I was talking about Grenfell Tower, you were both saying that we shouldn't politicise these kind of tragedies, which I agree with. The problem with campaigning in an election, especially elections, is that they necessarily involve scoring political points. That's what elections are. It's very difficult to run an election campaign in the wake of a tragedy without it getting politicised.
But I'm not just talking about the election. I'm just using my experience within the election as a hook for it. It's much broader than just my experience within the election. I think that we're getting to the point where people are told, if you don't react in this way, and in fact they're told, you must react in this way, and if you don't react in this way...
We're also in an era, though, where we publicise all parts of our lives through social media. Look, this is the meal that I'm having, this is the holiday that I'm having. Well, that's what people do. They expose their privite life, don't they?
Me.
No, well, you don't. That's because I've seen what you eat and drink, and I'd be horrified for you.
Can I just ask a quick... I know it's a bit off-season, but this is my issue with poppies. I wear a poppy because I really feel a sense of grief for people who died. If I don't wear a poppy, I don't expect people to tell me how I should be feeling and how I should mark my respect. And that is the problem. I agree with you that I think that we have started to police people's emotional responses, and I don't think we should. So I'm curious what your views on poppies are. Does that carry through for that you think people should have a choice?
But I think we're missing the point here, because the man in the street is never going to be criticised for the way he shows his grief. The reality is, it's people like us that will be criticised because we put ourselves out there, we publicise ourselves, we go on TV, we do social media, and therefore, you know, my view is it's our choice. If we really care, we shouldn't be doing this. But the minute you do television or the minute you become a politician, you set a standard. There is an expectation, rightly or wrongly, you know, because, you know, I'm sure that I've made comments and people criticise, and I don't justify it because I remind myself it was my choice to do television in the first place, and that's the price you pay.
But my point is simply, most people, don't matter if you're old, young, man, woman, politics, not politics, if you see people dying, burning in a building, it's going to hurt you. And you're going to literally be strange if it doesn't. It's going to hurt you. So why can't we just start with that assumption that obviously if something bad's happened, people care?
I think if the victims had been looked after, I don't think they'd have cared whether Theresa May looked emotional or not. I think that the emotion is a bit of a red herring. It was the fact that they were left without advice,
but the emotion wasn't a red herring,
without support. No, that's where
it became a huge issue, and that's my problem.
It became a symbol of what they were going through.
OK, well, it's time for Straight Talk of the Week. Our chance to recognise someone who's gone beyond the usual soundbite and really put themselves on the line. And for me, there's only one candidate, Mohammed Mahmood, the imam who intervened after the London mosque attack. Here's how he explained the actions.
I always naturally just break up fights anyway. If I see a fight, I'll break one up. And he posed no harm to anybody because he'd been restrained. And now that he's restrained, let the police take him into custody and we hand him over, which is our duty as members of the British public, to follow the law, to hand him over unharmed, and to not contradict our own religion, which prohibits harming any unarmed man.
What do you think, panel? All Muslims terrorists?
No, while this is obviously the subject of ongoing investigation, what that imam did, had it gone the other way, the alleged perpetrator, if he had been beaten to death by a group of... You have no idea of the backlash, so that man is to be praised to the
And also the emotional control that he showed during that situation was absolutely incredible.
Well, that's it for this week. Goodbye.